I think we can get started now. My name's Jerry May. Roger Mellon couldn't make it at the last minute today, so he asked me to stand in. And when he told me who our speaker was, there was a rush of excitement. Number one, because he's a very dynamic speaker and a very interesting person. But also, I've had a few questions over the years. Since Brian has left Crememco. He was at Crememco in 1978 when I joined. And one of these questions is, in 78, he was driving I believe it was a Porsche 924 with a customized license plate that said Dazzler. Which was, at that time, it was a nice car, but really nothing to write home about. And subsequent to that time, he left Crememco, and I've remained at Crememco for the last 6 years. And I think it was probably 1 or 2 years later that someone in sales, I happened to be walking through the cafeteria one day, and somebody in sales came up and said, "Hey, did you see out in the visitor parking lot, Brian Jobe just drove in with driving in a Rolls Royce?" I thought, wow, that's really something. And then about 6 months ago, we have another entrance at Crememco. There are 2 entrances, and I was walking out the employee entrance, and I saw Brian pull up in a Porsche 928, which I think is also very impressive. And the reason I mention this whole thing here today is that when Roger asked me to come up and introduce Brian, he said if Brian didn't show up at class right away, that I was to go out in the parking lot and look for a white Ferrari. Now, these maybe aren't the best yardsticks for a measurement of success, but in my mind, I'd sure like to know how Brian did all that. With that, I'll turn it over.
Thanks, Jerry. Okay. Oops. All right. When Roger called me, it was really good timing. I am a product of this environment, and I'd been, quote-unquote, too busy. The ultimate luxury, and to follow on the comment that he made about success, it's more or less whatever you make it. Success is really first success to you. It's totally irrelevant what success is to everyone else. Somebody who sees me here in California drive up in a white BB 512, to somebody like that, they may think something about it. You try to do that in the East Coast, you will not close any business, that's for sure. There's a whole mindset here about the Valley that is quite unique. In fact, most of the people who are trained here, as I came out of the class in 1973. Roger and Harry were teaching assistants in my EE classes. I went through Stanford as a mechanical engineer. My senior year, I got to the point where what was left in the series was relative physics and a few other things, and I realized it wasn't going to help me fix my car. And in the meantime, absolutely everything that I had learned that I considered my hobby, which was electrical engineering, R.J. Smith and Dr. DeRosa were my 2 mentors. In fact, Dr. Smith was my advisor, convinced me that, geez, everything you know in electronics is completely obsolete every 2 years. I thought, this is a fantastic kind of a stimulating environment. One of the questions that a lot of people come through here never ask, and probably one of the more important one is, why is Silicon Valley here? Well, the guy that this building is named after is obviously the reason. Dr. Terman had one simple concept, which was something that if I looked out of business school about, say, weeks to months afterwards, I joined Crememco. Actually, I graduated from business school in '77, May 23rd, and I was going to take 2 weeks off, and I came out here, and I'm knocking around the valley. Who do I run into? R.J. Smith. He's running around in a little blue MGB, and we started talking. He says, yeah, in fact, I'm on my way over to class, and Harry's the guest speaker. So I thought, great. So I come in, and I think the 25th was like a Friday, and of course, I'm not booked to start at Crememco for a couple, 2 weeks, and I've been in school for the last 18, 20 years or whatever. And I see Harry, and Harry basically somehow talks me into starting Monday. So that was when the whole thing started. And with respect to that, I worked for Harry and Roger, who the first time I became interested in Crememco, I did not know that it was Harry and Roger's company. I knew them as an undergraduate, but I also, while I was sitting in Boston, started reading in one of the first computer stores there that opened up about all these fantastic devices. In fact, I subscribed to Popular Electronics, so of course, January 1975, cover article hit from a company called Measurement and Instrument Telemetry Systems. Albuquerque, New Mexico firm, who basically made, since they're down there in Rocket Land, used to make, in fact, SD's Rocket was next door. They used to make little devices that you could send up, rats and cameras and things like that in your little model rocketry. And when the rocket got up there, you could hit a button and turn around and take photographs of things. Obviously, people take them over to their neighbor's pool while the guy's wife's out there, all kinds of crazy stuff. And in fact, NITS was going down the tube. What was happening in 73, 75? Basically, calculator kit wars. Everybody was making $400 calculator kits, which were basically rivaling the $1,500 mechanical clunkers. All right. In fact, Roger and Harry, during that period of time, had evolved through to where they were doing a lot of consulting here in the Valley and got very much involved in that technology. In fact, one of the earliest arguments Roger and I had was about basically, they as educators, I was saying, well, gee, this whole pace of technology is increasing faster and faster and faster, and obviously it's taking less time to go from the labs to the marketplace, and that's the epitome of what Silicon Valley is about. Roger goes, no, wrong. Pixel breath? No. He goes, it's always 10 years. It's always been 10 years. It'll probably always be 10 years. Now it's partially right. Now it's more like 7 years, but he's exactly right. We started looking at, I took a class here from somebody who worked at Intel. And we were talking about magnetic domain memories. This was 1969. And I think back, it's now 1979 when Roger and Harry are having this discussion. I'm going, my God, he's right. It was 10 years from the time LEDs were being played around here in the labs to the time the first calculator appeared in the market. It was 63, 62, 64. In fact, you'll see the patents from a lot of people here. It wasn't until 73 that a calculator appeared with LEDs. In fact, I took my last final exams in 73 with the first Commodore calculator, $139 I bought at the bookstore or somewhere downtown, which was the greatest thing. I was the one guy with the calculator sitting there, everybody else had slide rules, right? So I was a gadget freak back then, and that's probably the common basis behind a lot of this. We all have a simple philosophy. I think Harry and Roger basically espoused best, and I follow that philosophy as well. And pretty much everybody who's ever worked with me or for me or around me or anyone I've ever worked for is pretty much indicative of Silicon Valley. It's number one, it's got to be a lot of fun. If it's not fun, something's wrong, and you either fix it or you go on to something that is fun. Number two, it had best attract and motivate the best people money can't buy. The third thing is it better make enough money such that it throws off cash, because cash is the oil that oils the mechanism that allows us to buy those toys. Actually, it turns out the cash isn't necessary. You can always generate the cash on the fly. That's something that's even a more valuable skill, and I don't care what else you learn, what else you strive to be good at. Finance is still the ultimate skill. It's what's wrong with most of the companies that you find growing here in the Valley with respect to the following situation. Any company, in fact, you've always heard the famous real estate joke, the only thing that's important in real estate is location, location, location. In starting a company and business in general, there's only three things that are important. People, people, people. People make companies, people break companies, people create products, people ruin products sometimes. It's people management. And the problem that you have as an entrepreneurial engineer is that we spend so much time, and I speak as someone who was guilty of this for many, many years, and may still be guilty of it, which is that it's the people side of this whole thing that's the most important part. We are blessed here with a fountainhead of technology. One of the advantages that Silicon Valley has, principally fostered by the university, is that the objective of the university, in fact, the reason Stanford was founded, and I never saw this. I was being recruited because of my swimming background, and I had said ahead of time I was only going to go to two places, Stanford or Yale. And after I came here, I'm looking at the orientation brochure, and in there it says, gee, Stanford started the university because he was hiring Yale and Harvard law students, which knew everything there was to know about the law, but they had very poor people skills. His objective was to form a place that turned out well-rounded individuals. I said, well, holy Christ, that's exactly what's different here. I was basically signed, sealed, and delivered in deciding where I was going to live at Yale. My brother was already on a full scholarship for swimming, and I was the world record holder at the time for my event. So I had the luxury of being able to pick that sort of thing. It was a last-minute decision for me to stay and come here to Stanford. It was one of the most valuable decisions I ever made. I would be an entirely different person. No question in my mind how unbearable I would be like that. I may be a little unbearable now, but my point is that it was exactly the philosophy that I had discovered and stumbled into. I'd gone to 2 years of high school here in Santa Clara and had been around Stanford, but no one ever communicated to me the essence of what this place is. It is precisely the reason that Silicon Valley is here. The cooperation that academia should serve the needs of industry, not the other way around. Now, what happened to me is a gentleman whose name escapes me. I have a horrible acuity for names, but I never, ever forget a face. Gentleman that I met was the head of the ME Design Division, who I, as a high school student, was being recruited. So naturally, people, try to snow you a little bit, and the coaches here were going out of their way to do that. I had been in and around, knew everybody on the swimming team because we were all good friends and buds for years. And as such, nothing that I saw had swayed my mind. So I'm running around here seeing everything going, well, yeah. Then finally I met this gentleman. Walk into his office. On there's this huge chrome valve with a dial on it. And I start talking to him. I said, what's that? You start talking back and forth. And it suddenly dawned on me. Here I am, a snotty-nosed high school kid. And this guy's actually listening to me. And I realized it went beyond his being set up to try to promote me to come to the school. This guy really wanted to hear what I was saying, and suddenly it jerked me around. I'm going like, wait a second. In the Ivy Leagues, it's like, kiss my ring, I am your professor, you are here for me. And here's this dialogue going on with this guy. I'm going, my God, it was a $35,000 milk metering system from a Swiss dairy. His consulting project was to figure out how to make it for $3,500. Now, there's another good example of the difference between the East Coast and here. Everybody out there, here we have Central Expressway that goes this way. In Boston, you have Route 128. It's only a curved Central Expressway. And the mentality in the East Coast in the computer domain is, of course, gee, we can make this twice as good as anybody else, and therefore we got a hell of a business, because if we can only do it 60%, we're still 30% better, and that's extra. And where you go. If it's not 10 times better here, you're in the wrong business. There's another 10-time opportunity somewhere else that you're overlooking. And that's been the mentality for a long time. And it's clearly a bylaw of what we do now. We're into tens and threes. A couple of things we're doing right now are sending pictures. In fact, I'll throw up some art here. Somebody want to shoot that? Here you go. This is from the company I founded in my home 5 years ago. I built while I was working at Cominco. I met a gentleman in the hallway that Roger had introduced me to who was into synthesizers. And there's a common basis in music and everything else here, where we started talking, and I said, what do you do? A guy by the name of John Dunn. He was basically an approach. I just finished a stint at Atari and video games and some other things, and he said, gee, what I'm trying to make is a system that'll make art electronically. So we hit it off right off the bat. I said, oh, really? And we started talking because the principal thing, the Dazzler that he's talking about was the first patented display in 1978 to a home computer. Now, first off, going back to the fun side of things, is, once again, a principal difference between the East and West Coast. Out here, if we can't buy the toy, and if we can't get the one we want, we'll make it. It's called an Apple I. It's called a paint box. So the first of these paint boxes sitting at my house 5.5 years ago, when I've always had the finest audio recording studio, because I was brought up in a very musical family. Everybody used to sing, except me. I'm going like, oh, you guys, silly. But it stuck with me. And as such, a company called Levi Strauss was producing an audio tape in my home. They saw a box that now produces this type of imagery, the early version of it, which of course was a Cominco product, sitting in the corner, and they said, gee, we are the video producers for this piece as well. It's called Family Tradition. Every employee who comes through Levi Strauss is going to see it. I said, oh, really? They said, yeah. In fact, we had just finished an 18-hour stretch. If any of you have worked in the audio business, you know how that goes. Coffee and all that stuff. So it's now midnight, and everybody's burnt to a cinder. And they start talking to me about the box over in the corner, and I'm going, yeah, well, they start arguing with me. They go, can it make video? I said, well, yeah, it can make video. No, we mean broadcast video. I said, yeah, it makes broadcast video. Said, no, you don't understand. We need to be able to videotape it. I said, yes, it makes a thing called RS-170A video. They go, you know what A means? You know what RS-170A means? Going, yeah. And he says, look, we've been trying to tape apples and oranges and all, we've been trying to be able to videotape out of graphic systems for years. And mind you, this is 78, 79 kind of time frame. And I said, look, these guys now had really ticked me off. So I say, I'll do it for free. So I call up a guy, I call up a guy who was one of our larger customers, a guy by the name of Bob Caesar. Bob Caesar came here, if you ever know the story about Captain Crunch, the phone freak, and all this, John Rayford. There you go. I knew you'd know it. The guy who taught him everything he knows, the guy by the name of Bob Caesar, came here at 23, and he's sitting there beeping into the phone, and he was one of the original guys now. He's recently taken over a company he was fired from called IVC, one of the longest running Chapter 11s in history, and turned it into Caesar Industry. Man has an ego that won't quit. But by the same token, he and I had gotten to be friends because I was selling him all the microcomputers to control these decks. That man had programmed a Z80 to do video editing. I got to tell you that this image you're looking at here was constructed in the days of processing by Dr. Ken Knowlton on a Z80. It was not a Cray XMP at Digital Productions. Same level of resolution and quality, but he did it in one day on the same Flamenco Z80. Now, going back to Bob Caesar's over there in his house programming the world's quote-unquote first microcomputer-based video editing system. Well, he created the first computer editing system, period. They all went from Ampex to IVC. They never quite figured out how to make a buck at IVC. Bankrupted it, went on to Caesar International, and a company called Video Media, which still uses banks and banks and banks of S100 cards to control the rolling of all those decks. Now, Ampex invented video, but the Japanese out-manufactured them and own the market. But it's still controlled by companies located within 5 miles of this hall right here. I.e. the smarts and the software part of it is still a dominant industry that we alone in this valley still dominate. I don't care what it is, we still do. So all the Japanese decks now are still controlled by American computers and machines, and they don't do anything without one. They never entertain without one. So Bob and I had a long friendship because I used to have to fly my personal machine home. I met Bob one day when he was complaining about his first disk drives screwing up, and I was the head of customer service. When I came out of business school, Memco was 9 people. There were actually 15 people had been and gone, some of which is a gentleman who wrote the first animation, Steve Dompier, up at Iron Graphics today. And everybody came running in. I formed the customer service department, which is me. So I had to get guys like Jerry and everybody who knew how to work everything. I put my MBA in the drawer, and I basically said, I'm now the customer service department. So what I had to do is figure out a way to get Joe McCrate, who was the head of software, whose name appeared in every ad, in a box in a corner and say, how the hell does interrupts work on the 2i, all this, and not appear to be an asshole. So every time they'd see me running, otherwise they would have disappeared because they knew I was coming after for some reason. So I ended up building all the kits, and then finally we organized customer service, and we're basically number 1. We went from number 5 to number 1 in under 5 months. Memco, the day I walked in the door, May, finished that month, was a historic month, the first month where we shipped an annualized rate of $1 million worth of product. But by the 18th month, we were doing over 20 million, and we still had under 100 employees. And the way we did it is, number 1, people, and automating like hell, everything you could. I went home for 60 hours once and basically shut off all the phones, hamburgers, or whatever, and I wrote a management system, which my background was software in Hawaii. After I graduated here, I went and spent a couple of years in Hawaii learning whether I wanted to go and get a master's degree in technical stuff or get business. But basically the customer support role was most important to me. Once again, the people interface, making sure everybody was happy that bought the product. Well, everybody comes running in one day at about 5:30 screaming, "There's a madman outside." So what do you mean? So, well, this guy's got his Cadillac parked in the front steps. I'm going, what? I said, okay. So I walk out. Here's this brown Cadillac parked up the front steps. I mean, not front steps this way, but front steps this way, with a guy with a telephone in his ear and a pair of first-side disk drives under the yard, and the license plate says CEZAR. And I suddenly realized this is the video crazy that I've been hearing about. This market's going to take some special handling. So I go out there, and he and I hit it off real well. In fact, after one of my first interactions with Bob, and later on as I saw some opportunities there, Memco grew. We went from $1.25 million the first year to $12.5 million to $25 million, and we're basically out shipping Apple till what's sometimes called the disease called control. Engineering entrepreneurs want to own everything. I had a very small profit-sharing plan. But the Porsche he's talking about was, in fact, the first and major employee benefit that Commemco ever gave. And Roger and Harry are real good guys. They never said no to anything I asked, and I only asked for reasonable things. I said, give me $400 cut in salary. But because of the $400 you give me, I can only spend $185. If you give me the $400 cut in salary and lease me the car, I can take the whole $400. Okay? Real simple concept. Harry and Roger, one day I stumble in, I go to get a beer and a tuxedo to go to a wild and crazy party, and there's a blue car, same color and everything else. Happened to call up Saturday. Roger answers the phone. What are the odds? Okay? And I said, gee, what are your thoughts on that? He said, well, sounds like a good idea. Did you find a car? And I'm going there, and the salesman's going, you owe this to yourself. And I'm going, well, I think so. He said, well, what is it? I said, well, it's a brand new 924. He said, well, how much is it? Well, it's about, I think they were about 17, 18 then. He says, well, okay. Now, keep in mind, we had already hit the 20 million mark by that date, and the way we were doing it, I was on a little thing I wrote, which became known as the database management system. That 60-hour stretch went from Thursday to Monday morning. I came in, with the, terminal bags into my eyes, and gave everybody the source code and everything else, and said, look, guys, instead of writing an accounting program, which is what I'd been doing in Hawaii for years, that was the last thing I wanted to do. In fact, I pity the poor person who's still supporting that quote-unquote unstructured code. It's write once languages, The situation was, he said, okay. And when I got the car back to Commemco, Harry, upon signing the lease, said, well, God, that means I got to write out 148 checks? Well, we'll pay cash. They paid cash. Bob also had an affinity for toys. I had been flying my home computer around the world. Every time they would go and service the machine with their rings on their wristwatches and blow up the power supply and all that, I'd get a call from Paris, I'd get a call from somewhere. Someone in a half an hour would appear at my door, I'd hand them my home machine, it would appear on a plane and mysteriously appear and whatever, and I'd come back and nothing would work, So we had fostered a relationship, which I still have to say, he did something, it's not what you should do, which is more important. It's 10 times more important to know what it is you shouldn't do. And Bob and I formed an interesting relationship after that first day, such that I was able that night, really, Levi Strauss, to call him on the phone at midnight. Now, what I did not know was he had had a heart attack 2 days earlier and was in bed sick and whatever. He comes shuffling in a bathrobe, with his socks on, and tunes up the machine. He tunes up. By tune up, I mean genlocks the machine to their video deck, and sure enough, we do the complete animation they want, which is to show how Levi Strauss appeared as a blue jeans company, then then everything moves around, So we do it, and we knock out this animation in 2 hours. So by 2:30 in the morning, it's all done. Now, I find out later that, Bob's had a heart attack and all this, and he's come out of his deathbed to do this, And I'm going like, holy shit. Well, Bob, the first time I met him, once again, a very good-sized Commemco customer, somebody who taught me probably most of what I know and introduced me to the good old boys of the business, right? It's about 8 guys, all who worked in service, who basically left Ampex and service to start their own company. But any idea about finance? So the comment I made before about finance, you ought to get some finance courses here. It's the single most powerful skill because finance is, cash is, et cetera. Cash is like blood cells. I don't care how strong your heart is. If you don't have enough blood, you're dead. The company is like, a heart. Its whole operation is like, in fact, Harry taught me the model of a money machine. What Bob Caesar taught me, in fact, after one of our more brutal sessions, I had designed a product for them. He was the only guy, which was an encoder that made graphics rather than the way everybody else was doing it. So there's something wrong with that. Not only can't you put an encoder near a computer because it gets all these black bars in it, I said, but secondly, it looks terrible. We did the animation for Levi Strauss that night in my home again, 2:30 in the morning, and they got the product they wanted, and they looked at it and said, gee, that's fantastic. They said they got the product, and they're sitting there going, well, wait a minute, it would have taken us 6 weeks to 6 months to get this another way. And I said, well, that's great. And they said, this looks great. I said, excuse me, I don't know much about your business, but that looks, and they said, well, that's NTSC, that's what's wrong with it. I said, what's all that, crawl and all that junk in the picture? I said, it looks great over here. Why does it look so bad there? And they started explaining to me broadcast video. I knew the RS-178 because I'm a marketing kind of guy, and I read that in the brochure. And the fact that I even said A, they meant that I differentiated myself from 98% of the other people in the computer graphics business who knew what the A meant. It means color. and a proposed standard for color that very few people in the Valley, everybody else made color by putting 3 black and white systems together. That doesn't cut it. The picture goes, and rolls. But we did it. They were astonished. I was sort of bored and tired and said, gee, there's got to be some technology around here to eliminate all that junk. So the first product we made, before there was even a via video, was I went to Bob and said, hey, the world obviously needs an encoder that not only is impervious to digital noise, but ups the color bandwidth so it doesn't have all this junk. Bob and I cut a contract between each other. In fact, the first thing I did when I formed via video was I took my first $10,000 back to Bob and I said, Bob, you fired the guy, 23 years old, who was building this product for you because he likes to listen to loud rock music and you don't. And this is true, by the way. A guy by the name of Dave Claiborne designed his first color TV when he was 13 in Cincinnati. It was a Christmas present to his parents. Had just come out. In fact, the first day I walked in to Bob with this product idea, because I figured he knew it. I knew there was a marketplace. He knew there was the technology. Dave was there with his car with Honda, with a U-Haul, with all this incredible. You think, Haltech has some great stuff. This guy had a U-Haul trailer, the only life possessions he brought with him. There's no bed, no mattress, no dresser. There's just all these incredible racks of equipment, which, to another gadget freak is like Disneyland. So we hit it off great, and he had Dave design the product. So the first thing I did when the product was sort of stalled because they were fighting and he didn't like his rock music, and Dave kept saying, well, you don't know how to do it. Anyways, they weren't getting along, so I took my $10,000, I sat down with Bob, locked the door. And for 2 hours, we yelled and screamed back at each other. But I walked away with the product that with him designed. Dave had done it, and Dave was now out in the free world because he'd been fired by Bob. And for $10,000, we bought the rights back to that encoder. Now, after that whole episode, Bob and I parted friends. I went on and are still good friends. In fact, that whole episode made me think of the title of a song, which I still think of when I think of Bob. It's called Old Man, Lend Me Your Scars. He basically told me of all the things he did. He personally signed his own name and guaranteed in notes, and I was going through that whole thing because the video started out of my home again. It was a bad time for me to leave Clemco. I was heavily in debt. I had a brother that had a problem, and what upset me, in fact, in one of the sheets I filled out here, somebody had a question about companies and the mentality of starting the new company. It's a reason for starting a company. And I said, well, that's always the same. I said, what do you mean? I said, it's frustration. Without frustration, there'd never be new companies. I said, I don't know of somebody who started a company who wasn't frustrated doing what they were doing. If there is, I'd like to meet them and figure out what kind of company it is. But it's probably not a big one. That was the case as well. So I started a bad time. We started in my home. In fact, a couple people who are joining me here today, 5 years ago, Via Video was 4 years old. The machine that produced this graphic. Now, the graphic that you see in the structure in the image was birthed in the mind of Dr. Ken Knowlton, but imaged, i.e. and constructed internally, on the first quote-unquote digital photography system called a Via Video System 2, which in fact is a graphic system with exactly this internal resolution and displayable resolution. We began shipping it in November, beta systems to the Fortune 500 crowd, and now have about 30 to 50 systems out there, such that January 20th, Via Video was 4 years old. Now, an era usually takes 3 years to do anything of substance. There's a famous hockey stick, or the S-curve you know about, where everybody always asks, gee, well, when's the market going to turn this way? Because we're used to that here. Other parts of the world are used to being somewhere on the slope forever. In our case, we always start out here, and all of a sudden everybody, in fact, the way we usually talk about it, this is called the sell slope. Everybody's selling, nobody's buying. And then this one is everybody's buying and everybody's trying to run like hell to catch up, okay? That's the only difference. And they say, where's the knee of the curve, what they call the knee of the hockey stick? In this market, you can analyze away all you want. Back in October, when I left Clemco, I said to Harry and Roger, I'm going into the market where nobody's going to call me when the checks don't come out on Friday. Nobody's going to be yelling when the printer jams, because there won't be any of that stuff. It's all electronic. Therefore, if it's all electronic, it'll be ultra reliable. So the paint boxes we took forward, starting with the Clemco product that we had produced, continued to extend the software to where we were doing and have today in 150 of the Fortune 500 companies. Complete animation hardware does real-time animation, 7 different styles of animation. Cell animation, what we call mini cell animation, where you can take a photograph of something and make the lion talk, walk, etc., like an electronic puppet, all done with a Z80. Now, everybody from the Macintosh group, the Lisa group comes up, and the Lucasfilm guys have for years. And this is an old product. This is the same product I was talking about from 5 years ago on my desk. said, how many 2903s are there in there? How many this or that and all that? I said, none. No, they thought we were completely bamboozling. All software. This is what this image would be correctly called the 18th generation environmental modeling system. It can show fur. It can show, things like that, which no other system in the world can do. The only machine on the face of the earth capable of doing this at this kind of a resolution right now is the first ultra supercomputer, which is the new generation Cray. The first Cray XMP did not go to work and did not get delivered in the computer business, in the weather business, in the scientific business. It went into the animation business, coupled with another $5 million in the frame buffers. If you saw the movie The Last Starfighter, there were no models ever shot for that movie. None. That Cray XMP, with its quote-unquote total capital base, $20 million, all right, can produce, running flat out for the entire year, 49 minutes of film. Now, if you go to make a movie in Hollywood, it costs, we're talking about a problem here which is very significant. 3 orders more data. A computer in the von Neumann side who goes, processes the number, it chunks it away with some other number, and spits out a result. It's a one-dimensional machine. Now, the only way we sped that up in the Valley and elsewhere is by basically putting a lot of these one-dimensional machines, in fact, parallel and sideways, so they can crunch, quote-unquote, arrays, right? What are those? Lots of little one-liners that, by parallelism, go that way. Problem is, when you look at this image, and the picture in general, picture's got a data structure which is tall, an order of data that's wide, which if that wasn't bad enough, now you got deep. So you got 3 dimensions. And as such, to build a machine that could work at video, film, and print resolutions, this is a completely digitally printed 4-color separation. We can produce any image from any source, either the mind of the guy or a physical photo like what's sitting down here or anything else, and print it to film at the limits of what ink can be made to flow on paper. I've got a piece of clip art here. Let me go ahead and show this. Actually, let me show a larger version of it here. I've got it. Once again, an image. I'm not in love with the 80s, but I've been fascinated by the degree that these guys, they're light years beyond what I would ever imagine. The gentleman I met Thursday, my crew went down to Los Angeles. You might get a shot of this if you can. Print poster that was done for a computer graphics ad. All right, this entire sequence here, done at print resolutions, was in fact done 2.5 years ago in a Z80-based graphics system called a System 1. Now that was a bigger brother to the Comenco product that I originally started to build in my home for Comenco. Now it's got a 68000 and a Z80, but the 68000 is just clocking clock. It really isn't, software-wise, been activated for a couple of reasons, technical reasons that are not important. We went ahead and finally said, well, look, everybody out there is going to be building computers that compute numbers, not pictures, and they're going to take an add-on graphics buffer, which wasn't designed to do this kind of pictures, i.e. this kind of resolution in the dots. This might be a 300-megabyte file right here. This one, interesting enough, was a 12-megabyte file, but it has been processed and post-processed beyond the limits of what ink can be made to flow on paper. This was scribed by a laser. Problem is, in the printing business, you're limited by how much ink you can get to sit in that little pocket. That pocket's been created digitally, if you're lucky, but generally the ink is the transfer medium, so therefore how small the particle of ink you can get is the limitation. So people keep thinking, gee, brute force will go farther. Wrong. This is a market. Once again, graphics is by far the largest market in the world. More than 10, possibly 100 times larger than the quote-unquote computer market itself. But it is not a place where an engineering mentality will succeed. You can't print this with a bigger computer faster. Obviously, this Z80 is competing to the quality of the posters that we can both do now. We can do them, of course, completely digitally with a $20 million set of hardware sitting down there. That was about, 5,000 megaflops or something. But the point is, it's still doing one thing. It's making art. It's making art digitally. But by the same token, quality and the results. The bottom line here, again, is cleverness will go 10 times farther than brute force will or money will. And it's now maybe 10 to the third power. It's more like 1,000-fold. We're doing things now in the new company. The new company, I left the video on January 24th. In good hands, the best quality. Basically, I was, and Jerry Heidenreich, who's in the back, joined me in fact, we all lived in my house, did everything out of my house. In fact, when we moved back to my house, we were trying to do it out, like everybody else does and be real, But it turned out it wasn't going right. We were trying to apply, we thought this technology was too early for the marketplace. Now keep in mind, it was October 1980. Everybody was still using graphics primarily for process control and maybe medical and the spook business. But we were basically dedicated, we wanted to make art, and we figured this technology would be great to revolutionize some other business while the technology emerged, and that business we chose to revolutionize was sending pictures of houses for sale over the phone. It's now October 1980, and the company we formed was called Video Tours. We basically allow you to sit down in a real estate office with a nice database system, the DVMS system, which I try to get everybody not to use, and basically sit there and ask for the MLS listing. Instead of going out in your car with the realtor, you'd sit in the booth. We'd give you 3 to 5 tapes and say, well, here are the houses. You can get a complete walking tour of the neighborhood in a minute and 35 seconds and decide whether it's worth going or not. If it's worth going, you basically would watch the other 10 minutes. And then there's the realtor doing her song and dance. Notice these wonderful walnut beams. And you're sitting there in your chair, and you know exactly whether that's the house you're interested in really checking out firsthand or whether it's a waste of time. But finance being what it is, we could see that interest rates were going to go to hell in a handbasket, and by 6 months later, as you probably remember, we had a huge recession. So at one point, we took up our football and went back to my house. As soon as we got to my house, everything started going great. I thought, wow, this is obviously what you're supposed to do in Silicon Valley. We were violating the norm, and obviously the entrepreneur gods were not kind to us. As soon as we moved back to my house, boom, 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 boom. We are about to leave here to go back. You can tell when an entrepreneur is raising money. He doesn't look like you guys. He looks like this, right? So this is my money-raising suit. Otherwise, I would be wearing something different. That's true. We raised, as of, I have a thing I have to sign today for the video. The video will have raised $20 million. Now, the conference we're going to, 2 years ago, Jerry and I and a few other people, we basically, I'll tell you the story of how we financed the company. You don't need a Harvard MBA. This is the video I'm talking about now. My new company is called Network Picture Systems. It basically takes everybody's graphic systems and allow them to talk together over phone lines so that you and I can, if you got me and you want to talk to me and I'm there or available, or else I have an image of myself already there, you can download it to your machine. It's like we're talking face to face. We can send a full color image, not just this resolution, but freeze frame video from any source, from point to point over a normal phone line in 15 seconds. That's over 1,000 times more efficient. That's Dr. Ken Knowlton's patent, which I found by basically getting on my little Commemco system in my house, because I thought of a great idea for doing this and sending the pictures so that the longer you watch them, the higher resolution they got. I thought, wow, I wonder if anybody did that. So I called Lockheed Dialogue, and I said, hey, give me all of the patent holders in this area, give me all the people who did masters or doctors, theses or dissertations, conference papers last week, and in 5 seconds. That system, which in 1978 had 80 gigabytes online, and a data structure that parsed all the words such that it would come back in 5 seconds and say, well, we have 4,523 articles with that characteristic. And we start going through them. Cost me $125, but I immediately came up with Ken Knowlton's name. Patent, 1976, for progressive grayscale transmission over phone lines. I'm going, what? You got to be kidding me. Why isn't everybody using it? I went further in 2 more episodes like that. In fact, I found that there were 3 software patents he had. And everybody knows you can't patent software. Not true. You look in there today, he's got 10 patents, 7 of which are hardware, for wonderful devices. 20 years at Bell Labs. So he got out of school, MIT, in Stanford of the East. He got out of the school in applied physics and chemistry, went immediately to work in a closet at Bell Labs for 20 years. Went through a change of life at 55, 56. Got divorced, decided to come to sunny California. This is 4 years ago, and of course it rained for the next 2 years. And he went to SRI, and at SRI he never quite got into the politics of how you get things done, because he's a one-man show. He basically you put him in a closet with a terminal and just jump back. And what he does for the patent office is he sits there and he serves up a document. He's been working for me now in the new company for 2 months. He's got 4 obvious patents, 2 in hardware, 2 in software. He keeps saying he was 1. I am an artist, number 1. Number 2, I enjoy working on real problems that no one else has solved before, that turn into data structures and manipulations, period. That's his view of himself, and it's entirely accurate. And once again, it demonstrates the hardest skill to acquire, which is the old, you hear it all the time, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And basically he has a knack for simplifying it. The bottom line is as follows. We do have a hell of a lot of fun. We, secondly, have been able to attract and retain the best quality people. The hardest skill to come out of this place with, and the most valuable one, and I rank them in this order, obviously, is one, people skills, and number two, finance. Those are not things normally acquired, but you're 10 times better off at Stanford because of that and because of what they made you do. All those econ courses or whatever, it's all going to pay off. In fact, it's an area you probably want to bolster that side of it. 80% of the companies in the Valley, I like a real gross generalization here, 80% of the companies in the Valley are in the hands of the wrong people, engineering entrepreneurs. They want to own everything. They want to have a large piece of what becomes a medium or small-sized pie. What you want, I have right now 5% to 3% or so of Via Video. Via Video has now got dominance in this business. We now have produced the first video, film, and print engine. It's our Apple II. And the technology is 100% owned by the company. So I felt it was time. It was the end of an era. The era took a little longer than we thought. 1 year longer, exactly. So it wasn't 3 years. It was 4 years, and now the second generation technology is out there. So at that time, I said, it's now time to go forth in the businesses that will be revolutionized by this technology because people are learning far too slow. The ultimate thing that is going to happen, and I'll make a projection here, we have between us, all of us, the capability. In fact, we're trying to do it between now and 1990. But quite frankly, it will, if we do our jobs right, all of us, produce the technology and the keys that allow the rest of the third world to go through the turn of the century on a par with us. Right now, let me just use a case in point. I've been doing a lot of work in Central and South America, which I actually paid my own way down there thinking there wasn't a business justification. If an entrepreneur thinks about anything, the first day of Eclemco, we were lucky to satisfy the demand for California. California was 90% of the market, 10% was everywhere else, meaning U.S. It then evolved to where the U.S. was, quote-unquote, the market, and Europe was maybe 10%. In fact, we started thinking about, well, geez, economic cycles where they are, there's big three. U.S. is going up, Europe is sort of going okay, and Japan's going down. They generally go sideways, so what we ended up doing is we put 80% of the computers that were in China by 1980 there. I was fortunate to have been on the first team that went in there from Stanford in '73, and that helped when I came back. They really mean it when they say, we are your friends, etc. So we ended up putting a third of our business there, a third of our business in Europe, and a third of our business close to home. And that worked great. When I went down to Central America, particularly Costa Rica, with the China experience behind me to help them figure out how to roll over $4.5 billion in world debt and all this other stuff, they figured technology would be their answer. It wasn't quite true, but it is going to be true. We set up a center there. These are, keep in mind, all the Central American countries that ring the equator who immediately said, we have airspace rights for those satellites that are parked over there. The Soviet Union and the U.S. go, oh, right, sure. So they now, though, got their transponders, and now they can talk to us face-to-face using our new technology. In fact, one whole division of the new company, the Learning Systems Division, we call it LISA, Learning Integrated Systems Approach. We don't sell training systems. We sell learning systems. We don't sell systems. We put them out there. We pay for them to go out. The money electronically flows without any border guards, okay, from their accounts to ours. In fact, no customs clearance is necessary to send our complete documentation, all of our animation, all of our designs to our new widget. Not one border guard, not one person. It flows from my garage to them, from them to my garage. If I want to connect all of my offices, we'll immediately have, Vivadu's had 8 offices. We're about to have about 50 of them between now and January 186. We're opening the chain of color image centers, the first of which is the top of number 2 Lombard, a very historic building. It's where Southern Pacific used to turn around the trains to go back down. So we're trying to, quote-unquote, turn this whole thing around. The point being is this. Right now, no matter how serious it is anywhere in the world, there's 4.75 billion, just under 5 billion people. Only 500 million can get to a telephone for any reason of urgency. The way that we are basically, in fact, Jerry's running around with my telephone in a suitcase there, the same technology we're using to allow me and my phone to be as productive as I am in my house. When I leave my house up until April, My productivity goes down that thing. So the fast cars and any of that, it helps me, as you can remember, get to the airport when they're closing the door. You know? There's another whole set of things you do when you get there and you want to get there slow. That's what the Rollses and the vans and those things. Those are really offices. They're really portable offices. And with cellular phone technology, we will have telephones on our wrist. Radio Shack will be selling the $1995 wristwatch telephone by 1990, maybe 2.5 years from now, but the demand will come down. There'll be a problem for a while. It won't get down to the $200 range like people are projecting for a while. It'll be stuck at the $995 and the $500. There's a magic consumer mentality which has withstood the test of time and the ravages of inflation. It's called $500. Anything, when it becomes $500, suddenly takes off. It's the knee of the curve if one wants to predict where it is. Well, when will it be $500? That's the question you ask yourself, and that's the date that you round the knee of the curve. Well, from a marketing mentality, the farthest you can stretch $500 and still be $500 is $595. So everything we do is $595. You can take a box home. Everything is better than what is it, a nickel 98 or a buck 380. The point is that the technology we have here immediately, it's like opening a guy's brain, and in 3 minutes you can completely download anything you want them to understand. Pictures, sound, sight, and sound. You remember 20% of what you hear, 40% of what you see, but 60 to 75% of what you do. So the whole concept of interactive video and all that, which quite frankly, most of the applications were brought out 75 and or so. They've all been done and are invented. When I was a little kid, I got really depressed at one point because I suddenly realized, God, all the good stuff's been invented. That's terrible. And I suddenly realized, geez, the rest of my life, there's nothing left to invent. All the good stuff's already been invented. I used to have to go to swimming meets all the time, so I took a pair of roller skates, tied them together with a belt and a little loop. So rather than lugging a suitcase, it was bigger than I was. It always took, my concept of packing was wait till the last minute and then just take one end of the rack in the closet and let everything slide off and take it. So you take 10 times more than you need and you're guaranteed to still have forgotten something. But my point was, I used to take that little roller skate around, and then what was it, 20 years later, people who had luggage racks to do that sort of thing. But I never saw those things as being innovations. They were just too obvious. So, but the good stuff that I always aspired to, having the ultimate video synthesizer, ultimate audio synthesizer, and those sorts of things, came home. That's obviously part of the driving force here. I now have the best digital facility in my home for audio and our video. In fact, we make things like compact discs. You're probably all real familiar with these. This was the first compact disc, as far as I know. I don't know that it was actually the first one, but I know that they sent two to every dealer. What I'm holding here is 1,000 times purer than ivory snow. It's a 554 megabyte hard disk, which you can buy for $229 at service merchandise through the mail. The battery-operated digital disc recorder. This little 25-cent piece of plastic has 554 megabytes on it, oriented like a 9-track tape machine. Now, what does it do? It plays perfect. Its distortion is unmeasurable, even on this little tiny box. The rest of this is a lockout case. I've already broke 3 of these, but this is the whole unit, okay? I was skiing with this around my neck 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Thankfully, all of you didn't know that Squaw was open, that it was. They had great snow. So I basically, since the transport was sideways and they didn't produce these little battery carriers, and I couldn't get a digital player for my car, no matter how much money we had, I basically was able to finagle one of these out of them early and basically built a little VTR battery pack on my back. And since the transport goes this way, and if you jerk it, it'll go. I just simply mounted it this way. So I was running around Squaw that day, if you saw me, with this and a pair of headphones. It is 99.9999% distortion free. The part of the learning curve you're on here to get to the next 0.0001% improvement would be an unlimited amount of money. But you can buy one of these from CBS Records now for $7.99. Those of you who are paying $12.95, you're paying too much snow. But this is obviously, we live in techno-land, so if you go to Tower Records in the city, that used to be one little rack, then it was the front of the store, then it was the front of the store in 2 racks, it's now the middle of the store, and this is taken over. But you go to Tower Records in New York, I'm sitting at Tower Records, and I'm going through this thing, and I look over, and I'm going, holy shit, these Garfunkel's here, and you read all these wild and crazy guys, because there's 3 racks there, and anybody who wants a CD disc in New York's got to go there, because it hasn't taken off like that, but it has here, because we live in a land where all the wild and crazy things here are totally taken for granted. You put a 6-year-old down on one of these machines, no big deal. I'm absolutely serious. Jerry and I are sitting there. You also don't get somebody to go to a third place to do something new. That's a real fundamental concept. A guy named Lou Gehrig, who started Midas Mufflers, taught me as well. In fact, he even paid his own plane fare up to come see us 5 years ago because he liked, as Jerry would say, he liked my BS over the phone. But it's good BS because it's real. And he basically convinced us, look, if you want to get these guys who are graphic artists to tell you what they need, go in a graphic artist store. So we basically took 2,800 square feet in a graphic arts supply store and let everybody come in and play with these machines. One day, a little girl, 6 years old, comes in with a little envelope, and she doesn't even clear the desk. And she says to Jerry and I, she says, can I borrow your Xerox? Big word. So what for? And she says, well, I gotta turn this into my class tomorrow. She pulls out a drawing of Mr. Toad, and she's obviously drawn herself freehand. Jerry, the light bulb goes off, and oh. He takes her over to the machine, sits her down, and walks away, which is our normal stunt, because we let the machine start talking to them, and after they first start doing the second frame of the training disc, they totally forgot anything to do that they're now making art, and they're all successful. So the hurdle of, gee, that was complicated, etc., we solved a long time ago. The joke about what we do, if you think about it, we're serving up the absolute most incredible graphics technology in the world to people who are completely anti-technology. Not one person using our machines got a gadget anywhere in their purse or person. And as such are pretty much the antithesis. They're anti-technology to a large degree. Now, she sat down in the machine and started making her own drawing. Not a word. Not a peep. She goes, thank you, and she's gone. That was it. To her, that must be the way the world does it. You know, she never stopped to think twice, and that's true now. We had one of our artists has a 1.5-year-old who sits on her lap on the chair, and he just picks up the pen and goes to town. I mean, it's we all pass on our perceived limitations and our learned limitations to the generation coming up. But any of these kids living around here who get exposed to this stuff, no big deal for them. They take it totally naturally. Okay, I'm going to be, I guess for a little while, I'll be here. We're going to have to make a speed run down to Monterey. Today is another major forum for entrepreneurs, for which you all, if you start companies, should take advantage of. The American Electronics Association was the first check we cut as via video. When we only had $5,000, we cut a $485 check to the American Electronics Association, primarily because it is an organization that does great things. One of the things they've done is they produce an entrepreneurs forum for venture capital. Venture capital is the wrong name. There's 500 of these guys who bring in the bushels of money, who basically are there to hear what you're saying. It's totally a seller's market. I mean, we get up there and we basically say, we are so-and-so, we are doing this, whatever, and then they all go to rooms and they sign up, 500 of them to talk to you to find out what size check you need. It's great. Makes you, and for that you wear a suit. Okay, thank you very much. I'll be happy to talk to anyone.